Holy Gospel continues in Luke chapter 1. Mary said, "My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you, my Savior. For you have looked with favor upon your lowly servant. And from this day forward, all generations will call me blessed. For you, the Almighty, have done great things for me, and holy is your name. Your mercy reaches from age to age for those who fear you. You have shown strength with your arm. You have scattered the proud in their conceit. You have deposed the mighty from their thrones and raised the lowly to high places. You have filled the hungry with good things, while you sent the rich away empty. You have come to the aid of Israel, your servant, mindful of your mercy, the promise you made to our ancestors, to Sarah and Abraham and their descendants forever." Mary stayed with Elizabeth about 3 months, and then she returned home. The Gospel of Christ. Please be seated. The anonymous gospel storyteller that we call Luke addresses his depiction of the life of Jesus of Nazareth to a character named Theophilus. Our storyteller begins with these words: "Many others have undertaken to compile a narrative of the events which have been fulfilled among us, exactly as those happenings were passed on to us by the original eyewitnesses and ministers of God. I too have investigated everything carefully from the beginning, and I have decided to set it down in writing for you, Theophilus, so that you may know the truth concerning the things which you have been instructed. As I have told you many, many times before, when you are reading the ancient texts, you pay attention to what? The names. The names are crucial in ancient texts. Ancient storytellers are well known for selecting particular names for their characters with great care, and they foreshadow what is to come in the story. The character Theophilus is a case in point. Theophilus comes from the Greek words which mean lover or lovers of God. Our anonymous gospel storyteller is addressing his account of the life and times of Jesus to everyone who is a lover of God. In the ancient world, a miraculous birth story was part of being a famous person. Jesus was a famous person, and so Jesus needed a miraculous birth story. Birth stories were used by storytellers to set their heroes apart from all the others. And Luke's birth story certainly set Jesus apart from all the other would-be messiahs of his day. But I don't think Luke was worried about the would-be messiahs. He was more concerned with the Roman and the Assyrian and the Babylonian and the Egyptian so-called saviors and their birth myths. So his birth myth is almost a contradiction of the myths that the people would have been familiar with. But there's something that's even more unusual about this birth myth, and that is that Luke weaves his story from the perspective of Mary. And there's something about Mary that we modern readers tend to miss. Today, more often than not, modern depictions of Mary fail to mention the revolutionary character of this ancient protagonist. Mary is no bit player in this story. The role of Mary is actually revolutionary. And over the years, generations of listeners and readers have taken the author's depiction of Mary and created an image of Mary that is marginal at best. But there's a dark side to our images of Mary. The popular image of Mary paints her as the ideal woman that no woman could ever live up to. The image of Mary is that she is both a virgin and a mother, meek and mild, obedient and perfect. She is impossible as a role model. because she is an unreal character, as she is portrayed in modern times. The idealization of Mary is a major factor in the sanctification of Christmas. The ideal popular image of Mary fails to reveal the true nature of the Christ child that she bears. In order to see Jesus, we have to move beyond Mary's popular image and look at what the author of Luke actually wrote about Mary. It is in the words of the Magnificat that the author reveals the revolutionary character of the rebel Mary. The Magnificat is the song Mary sings when she meets Elizabeth. And when we read it in the original Greek, it's clear that Mary bursts into song. The text of the song is a revolutionary text full of historical meaning that would have been clear to its first century listeners, but the radical nature of the song has been lost as successive generations have set it to music and prettied it up. The Magnificat has become a lovely tune, one that we all love in its many different and varied presentations. But in the first century, it did not sound so lovely. In the first century, Mary was seen as a revolutionary. Our anonymous gospel storyteller does not intend her to be Mother Mary, meek and mild, as the carols suggest. The references in the Magnificat would have resonated loudly in the ears of the first century audiences living under Roman oppression. They would have recognized these references as heroines of Israel and heard the words of this birth story as a call to rebellion. The song of the Magnificat is written in the style of two other songs from the Hebrew scriptures that would have been so familiar to the gospel storytellers' audiences. The song itself is set up by our gospel storyteller when Elizabeth addresses Mary as blessed among women. Now, this was not a normal greeting, not even in the first century. There are only two other texts in the scriptures where this phrase is used. In the book of Judges, Deborah, who was herself a prophetess and a judge of Israel, sings, "Blessed among women is Jael." Anybody remember Jael? You don't remember Jael? Well, blessed is she. Deborah's song goes on to tell us who Jael was and what she did. Listen to this ancient precursor to the Magnificat as it is found in the book of Judges. "Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite." Remember her now? You know, the wife of Heber the Kenite? She was a tent-dwelling woman. She is most blessed. Sisera asked Jael for water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. She put her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. And she struck Sisera a blow, and she crushed his head, and shattered and pierced his temple. He sank, he fell, he lay still at her feet. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. That's the story as it appears in Judges. Sisera was the commander of the Canaanite army. Deborah, the ruler of Israel, promised her general Barak that Sisera would be delivered into his hands. So Barak summoned up his troops and went into battle. As the Israelites seemed to be winning, Sisera fled to the camp of his ally Heber the Kenite, who was married to Jael. Jael invites Sisera into her tent, offers him hospitality, and after a meal of milk and curds, he falls asleep. And while Sisera, the enemy of the Israelites, lies sleeping, Jael bashes a tent peg through his skull. And for this, Jael is heralded as a great heroine of the people, as Deborah sings her praises, calling her blessed among women. The second woman in the scriptures who is hailed as blessed is Judith. Do you remember Judith? getting some blank stares here. Judith is also a heroine of Israel. Her story takes place as the Assyrians are laying siege to the town of Bethulia, where the Israelites have almost run out of water. Judith leaves the city, allows herself to be captured by the Assyrians, and she is taken to their leader, Holofernes. Judith pretends to be fleeing from the Hebrews and offers to betray them to Holofernes. Holofernes welcomes Judith and offers her hospitality. Judith then seduces him. After taking him to bed, while he is sleeping, Judith chops off his head with his very own sword. And she tucks his severed head into her food bag and escapes and returns to the Israelites. And when she returns, Uzziah, one of the elders, greets her with the words, "O daughter, you are blessed by the Most High, God above all other women on earth. Blessed are you among women." And later, a party is given to celebrate her victory. And Judith sings a song to God in which God's support for the oppressed is proclaimed, just as Mary proclaims that the rich and the mighty will be brought down. Our gospel storyteller makes other references to in his birth story, which would have been equally clear to his first century audiences. Now today, the angel Gabriel is usually portrayed with images like this, as a sort of effeminate or asexual being, long flowing gowns. But to do a more accurate description of the image of Gabriel from the first century, you'd probably need something from Star Wars. That's not the image that they would have had of Gabriel. Gabriel wore, in the imagery of his day, metal. To be precise, metal armor. And the mere mention of Gabriel would have conjured up images of a fierce warrior clothed in this metal armor, ready to do battle on the side of the Israelites. The name that the warrior angel insists on for Mary's child is what? What does the angel Gabriel tell Mary to call the baby?
Jesus.
What is Jesus in Jewish? Remember? Joshua. Now, if I asked you, do you remember Joshua? I mean, Judith and Jael, they were pretty good warriors, but you didn't remember them. Do you remember Joshua? Battle of Jericho, precisely. I wonder why you remember him, but not the two women warriors. Anyway, the name that is to be given to the child is, in Hebrew, Joshua, which means savior, right? Deliverer, or deliverance. But it would have conjured up images of a military hero, Joshua. Everything is in the name. Joshua, who succeeded Moses, conquered Canaan and established the 12 tribes of Israel in the Promised Land. Joshua, which comes from the Hebrew words for Yahweh is salvation. A hero, a warrior. Our gospel storyteller makes a deliberate link suggesting to his readers or his listeners that Jesus will follow in the same mold as a hero of old. First century audiences would have been very familiar with the parallels that were being drawn. Mary is being clearly established as a revolutionary heroine in a nationalistic and violent tradition. And the Magnificat is a song of rebellion, which proclaims the downfall of the prevailing order. The Magnificat is a rallying cry to overturn the established order of wealth, a tune intended to rouse the people to revolution. Our anonymous gospel storyteller, writing some 80 plus years after the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, knew exactly what kind of Messiah his oppressed people were waiting for. 2,000 years ago, in the dusty streets of Jerusalem, revolutionary ideas passed from house to house. The bitterness of Roman bondage had robbed the Jewish people of their ideals, but not their messianic hopes and dreams. Jewish eyes continued to peer through the darkness, lifting their heads towards the night skies. And the plaintive cry of the Israelites begged the question, when will this dark night be over? In their despair, the idea of rebellion, of revolution, was born. And it was linked to the coming of the Messiah, the promised Savior whom they were counting on to free them from oppression. The Savior they longed for to lead them to freedom, to establish justice, and to create shalom. This was what they wanted. That was the kind of Messiah the Jews living in the first century expected. The anonymous gospel storyteller knew his audiences well, so he plays on their expectation of a Messiah who will lead them into battle. And his audience want a military hero to free them from Roman oppression. And so our storyteller plays along. For 3 whole chapters, he plays into their desires. Now, we modern readers, we have this nasty habit of reading little pieces of the story and assuming that we know something about the story. Just imagine reading the first 3 chapters of any novel and then assuming you know where the author is going to take you. You've got to read on. Read on to chapter 4, where you will see the Messiah's character take a shocking turn. Wandering in the wilderness, tempted by Satan, Jesus refuses the power that is offered up. Jesus is not the Messiah the people are expecting. Mary is a woman who has a vision of what God will do, but she misunderstands God's purpose just the way Jesus' own disciples misunderstood what God was up to. Mary's song is the song of a heroine of Israel, for blessed is she among women. Mary's song echoes the words of the Hebrew Scriptures. My soul magnifies the Most High. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, who has looked with favor on the lowliest of God's servants. Surely from now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is God's name. God's mercy is for those who revere God from generation to generation. God has shown the strength with God's arm and scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. God has helped God's servant Israel in remembrance of God's mercy, according to the promise God made to our ancestors, to Abraham and Sarah, and to their descendants forever. A revolutionary song, a battle cry, urging the people to take up arms with the Messiah. That was Mary's song of rebellion. Mary's call to revolution. Her song was fulfilled in ways that Mary could not have dreamed possible. The kind of Savior the people wanted, the kind of Savior that even Mary must have envisioned, is not the kind of Savior who would or could ever save the world. There's something people needed far more than political freedom or material prosperity or military might. We long for, we yearn for the kind of Messiah who knows what it means to be human, who knows our suffering, our struggles, our loneliness, our pain, and who is willing to be with us. Emmanuel, God with us. Read the rest of the story if you don't believe me. Read what the author of the Gospel of Luke says and pay attention to the way he says it. The author has a truth to tell. Our Messiah refuses to be a military savior. Our Messiah is no tin pot Santa Claus who will save us from ourselves. Christmas is the time to celebrate Emmanuel, God with us. Our God, who is love, is with us. The Mighty One has done great things for us, and now we are called to bear the love that is God to the world. We are called to scatter the proud and bring down the powerful from their thrones, to lift up the lowly, to help fill the hungry with good things, and to send the rich away empty. It would be so much safer to leave this story at its literal level and forget about the author's imagination. At its literal level, this story is so much less threatening, so much less demanding. But in the end, the literal story has so much less truth in it. Oh yes, remember to pay attention to the names. Ancient storytellers reveal so much in a name. Now the name Mary comes from the Hebrew word Miriam. Can you guess what Miriam means? Any guesses? We don't have any Marys here, do we? No. Miriam has two meanings in ancient Hebrew. The first meaning comes from the words that make up the phrase, a sea of bitterness. And the second meaning of Miriam is rebellion. We don't know who Jesus' mother was. The name Mary doesn't come to us until some 80 or 90 years after the fact. The anonymous gospel storyteller chooses the name rebellion as the name of the character in his birth story. And Mary herself emerges out of a sea of bitterness, crying out for rebellion. There really is something about Mary, but it isn't what we have been led to expect. In the midst of bitterness, Mary had the courage to say yes to a dream of divine justice. Mary had the courage to let something grow inside her. She had the courage to harbor the child in her body. Do we have the courage to harbor love in our bodies? When the power of the Most Holy overshadows you, will you have the courage to trust the promise of a new way of being in the world? Will you have the courage to be a bearer of love to the world? That's the terrifying challenge that this story offers us. This story challenges us to be at love's disposal for the sake of the world, but be warned. Love-bearing is more than a little inconvenient. It can be heartbreaking and it can be lethal. Bearing love to the world means letting some of our Creator's passion for the world become flesh, and that can be costly. When love sends a messenger to you, will you have the courage to say, "Here I am, the servant of love. Let it be with me according to your word"? Will you have the courage to join the legions of Mary in a revolution to bear love to the world? Let it be. Let it be.